When I am thinking about the context of these things, I'm thinking about this nested hierarchy of beings. So we are within God, we are inside God, so we are separate and one with God. And so it's not separate or one with God, it's separate and one with God. So it's this superposition structure. And you can think about this even, in politics, there's this common question of, involving abortion essentially, and where people will ask, is it, a fetus a separate body or is it the same body as the woman? And it's just an ongoing, never-ending debate. And according to sentient singularity theory, it's because this is a being, a sentient being within a sentient being. Inside means separate and oneness. So it would be, it's not separate. Is it a separate body or the same body? It's both. And so that is, I think that some of these things, they seem blurry because in most contexts, when we're talking about things alone, especially, we try and divide it into, is that separate, or is it, the same thing, or is it a separate thing? But in the context of nested sentient beings, which I think is the more fundamental structure that space-time is kind of emergent from, or the perspective of space-time is emergent from, you're going to get things like separate and oneness. Instead of just separate or oneness, you're going to have superposition structures where it seems, in most contexts, that would seem like it's a paradox. But if you think about the concept of that one instance that I gave, of fetus, it's like it's clearly inside of another being, and also it's clearly separate and one, with the other being. Same thing with your cells.
Gravity. How are things attracted to one another, and what does that fundamental impulse of all matter reflect about that broader relational structure?
I think that gravity is probably due to the actions of the being that we're within. I mean, if you think about, if you were cells inside of a body, and that body were to move and do something, all of a sudden, all of the cells within that body have no choice, but they're like all moving towards, in some direction that it doesn't, that due to a force that is beyond them, and also part of, seems to be, within them to some degree too. So I think that gravity that makes sense within the context of, nested sentient beings taking actions, where one of them, if you take an action, and your cells are going to perceive this force that all of a sudden is moving them all in a certain way. And that kind of sounds a lot like gravity, which would probably correspond to oneness. And then we're just talking about what is gravity, not how are we defining it, but what is gravity as an experience and as an observable of all matter. I think that makes sense with just the concept that we are within a sentient being that's acting. Mm-hmm. And that means like moving to some degree. Essentially, we're moving in this, there's this periodicity of sentience that's happening where, hadrons or protons and neutrons move to atoms, which move to molecules, which move to cells, which move to organisms and family lineages. And then essentially, maybe you could say castes, and then